Good morning, everyone. Sue Nichols here from CMKG. Welcome to our session today. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes here. So looking forward to having some great discussion around optimizing your virtual presentations. Sue Nichols here from CMKG. Welcome to our session today. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Sorry about that. We're also doing this virtual live streaming on YouTube, so I had that going as well, so that's not going to work well. So that is resolved. If you have any questions or anything, you can type them in the chat box while we're waiting to get started, and otherwise we will get going in a few minutes. We're actually going to be using the chat box today to, if you have any questions, yeah, we're gonna have some fun. Now that I've got my glasses on, I feel much more sophisticated. So I think I look smarter too. There's just a few more people joining now. Okay, we're going to get started. I'm the believer of starting the session on the hour, so we're going to get going right away. Welcome to all of you who are participating in today's session. I am Sue Nichols. Welcome to our session today. I'm Sue Nichols from CMKG, and today I'm going to be talking to you about tips to optimize your virtual presentations. We're kind of in this new space now where virtual is really where I think we're going to end up landing on a lot of the work and transactions that we do in the future. I think that people have been really able to figure out how to maximize the use of them, but there's some really important things for you to think about when you're putting together presentations, if you're actually developing the session, everything from start to finish, to really polish it, because in the online space, your presentation and the flow and how things work and how the technology works and those kind of things really do play a pivotal role. So before we get started, I'm Sue Nichols. I'm the president and owner of CMKG, which is a training company. We work with retailers and manufacturers in all things related to data and analytics, shopper insights, presentation skills. Excuse me, we're also partners with the Category Management Association and offer certification training in category management. But you can see it on the right-hand side. We work with a lot of different types of organizations, and we have thousands of students in our learning portal. One of the things that we've had to do is kind of pivot and reinvent ourselves. We used to do a lot of live training, and in 2020, we had the opportunity to transition our training into virtual training courses, and they can be so highly effective. And that's part of the reason that we're doing this series of virtual training sessions right now, is to really help you understand how impactful they can be. We also are obviously offering new stuff on specific topics. This is topic number 2 of 6. And I'm also going to be giving you access to a micro learning tool after, if you're in the Zoom meeting, and so that you can go in and do a little bit more learning on your own. In terms of the virtual meeting guidelines, I wanted to put this into a meeting instead of a webinar. So if you don't feel comfortable with your name, you can change your name to a nickname if you don't want others to see it. If you feel comfortable with it, you can turn your camera on. I know that yesterday no one did, but if you want to turn your camera on, Please stay muted, and really please participate there's a few questions I'm going to get you to answer, and that's going to be through your phone, your mobile device, or through an alternate web browser. So we'll be doing that as well. Participation is really important in virtual, regardless of if it's meetings, training, or whatever, because otherwise it can get pretty darn boring pretty fast, and you can really lose engagement of your team, of the people who are in the meeting. So when I talk about virtual, I mean physical. It replaces physical face-to-face interactions. There's synchronous, where you're talking without people, which is kind of what I'm doing today a little bit. Synchronous is when you're talking with people, so you're having conversations. Asynchronous is when you're talking at people. And that's going to be when there's a big webinar or something like that, and there's a lot of people, so you can't be connecting with people. But in the virtual meeting place, it's usually less than that, with the exception of large webinars. And so the opportunity is to really make sure that you're maximizing those meetings. You can do it through video calls, but there's also video messages, phone calls, interactive chats, texting. Those are all considered to be virtual communication tools. So I would love it if you could grab your mobile device or an additional web browser and go to polev.com.cmkg up at the top. And you're going to see this question: what are the biggest challenges when creating and delivering virtual presentations? And I've got a few up here if you want to click on those ones. If you like them, you can upvote them, or if you have other ideas. But what are the biggest challenges that you have when you're developing your presentations? And so click on the ones you like, when we use these kind of tools when we're doing virtual training with a team, because it really does allow for anonymous feedback from people. But some of the biggest challenges that we have had feedback on is engaging the audience is a really big one. How do you get people to listen? How do you guys, David, Odette, Sabrina, Landrea, Ed, you guys are sitting behind your camera right now. I don't know if you're falling asleep or if you're actually engaged in what I'm doing. And so that's why it's actually nice to have the video on. So when you're doing your presentations for people, hey, David, woo, thank you. Somebody turned their video on. But it really does help to connect better with people, because I can look at you and we can, have discussions and those kind of things. So it really does make a difference. So if you are in these sessions, even if you're not leading it, if they ask you to, or even if they don't ask you to, you can turn it on and just clarify whether or not they want it on. So there's 3 things I'm going to talk through quickly today. I'm going to spend most of the time on the meeting preparation, but then I'm going to give you some tips on the meeting and then some follow-up things that you should be considering. So when we look at meeting preparation, it's a really important thing for you to prepare. And even if it's a half-hour meeting that you have that day, don't go into it with no plan and 4 minutes before the meeting, or even as you're launching into your Zooms or Microsoft Teams, you're like, oh my God, I got it. What are we going to be covering today? That kind of thing. Don't allow yourself to do that. So I've got some tips for you if you're setting up the meeting. So if you're doing a meeting invitation, sometimes they default. I know that Zoom defaults to saying like meet with CMKG. Well, what the heck does that mean? So make sure that you customize that title based on what it is that you're going to be talking about. And then down below, make sure that you're capturing what your overall objectives and even the agenda are for the meeting. And so I look forward to our meeting. What's your objectives? If you have time, you can click here. If you have something that you want them to read or any kind of pre-work, those kind of things can be super valuable and set the stage and tone for the meeting. So make sure you take the time, because sometimes we're in such a hurry, we just whip it together and send it to them. And it's so frustrating for me when I have an invitation and I go to look at what it is and I'm not even sure what I'm meeting about, because somebody set up a meeting with me and I have no idea what we're getting together to discuss. And that can be super frustrating. I actually will contact that person and ask them specifically and in advance, not 5 minutes before the meeting. And so the day before the meeting, make sure everyone accepted. Do you know everybody? So do you know everyone who's going to that meeting? Because if you're playing an active role, go research them a little bit, understand who the IT person is or the logistics person or whatever it is, even if it's people within your own organization, make sure that you understand that. And are there any reminders for pre-work? So if they really do need to get something done, if it's for your team, because you're managing a team, make sure you send a reminder with very specific asks so that people come prepared. You know, it's the difference between having a half-hour meeting and you're not even close to being done versus being done 10 minutes early because you were so buttoned down, you got through things, you hit the agenda, and then you left. So it can be, it's so worth it to spend that time. Sorry, I just realized I'm not sharing my presentation. So there we go. So now I'm sharing my presentation. So another thing to do is to try to avoid back-to-back meetings. And honestly, this is one that for me, I deal with clients all day long. And there's so many times when people come in late, they haven't had, they haven't even breathed in between meetings. You know, they're probably even dying for a cup of coffee. Really try, and I know that it's become something that I think is an innate problem in a lot of organizations, is not allowing that 10 or 15 or even 5-minute break between meetings. So bouncing from meeting to meeting and actually getting your brain to start changing its thinking from one topic to another is really difficult to do. You're not going to be as effective when you're just jumping in meeting after meeting. You're also not able to do the follow-up after and those kind of things. So especially if it's important meetings, put those breaks in before and after, like go physically book those times before and after to allow you to get set up, be there to greet people when they come in. And then at the end, do any follow-up or at least write notes or a reminder or create a task for yourself of what you need to do in the next day or two based on the commitments that you made. In order to make sure that you get those follow-ups done. Really important things. And there's a lot of that not going on right now. I think we need to be able to control our agendas ourselves. The other thing you want to do is make sure you have a purpose for your meeting. What are the main points you want your audience to take away from the presentation? What do you want them to know or understand? Even if it's you're managing a team, what do you want them to walk away with at the end of this meeting? We go into so many unproductive meetings and nobody really knows why they're coming in. And so if you have the purposes and what actions you want them to take, make sure that you think about that before you start setting up your actual presentation. The other thing that you really need to make sure is that you focus the purpose of the presentation on your audience and not on you and not on your business. If you can put it in the context of your audience, it's going to make it more meaningful and relevant, and it's going to help them to understand what they need to do in order to succeed, I guess, and in order to achieve whatever purpose that you have for it. So here's an example. You have been tasked with a presentation and you really want to show your retail audience. And when I'm talking about these presentations, it doesn't have to be a retail sales presentation, but in this example it is. You want to show how great your brands are and introduce some new SKUs for them to list. So you're super excited about it. Your brand is doing well. You have great brand recognition and you really want to show that to your audience. So when you're talking about your brand only, it's not going to be really focused on a purpose that's going to be helpful for your audience. So if you need to show how great your brands are in a category and introduce some new SKUs for you to list, what would be a way that you could rephrase that purpose in order to become one that might be more meaningful and interesting for a retail audience? So if you have any suggestions, type them in the chat box for me right now. And there's no right or wrong answers, but type in your chat box how you would rephrase. So your purpose personally may be to show how great your brands are and introduce new SKUs for them to list. But what might be more interesting and appealing for your retailer? What kind of purpose would they might want to see? So I'm just going to give you a minute to see if anybody types in any suggestions for me. But these, once again, chat boxes are a really great way to get people participating. Show how my brand benefits the retailers. Okay, any other ones? Thank you, Ed. So my recommendation for this one is to show them how to increase sales and profit in a category through innovation to satisfy an unmet shopper need. So that it's not about just you and your brands. I've worked with a lot of companies, and a lot of the time what ends up happening is that they go in, they talk all about their brands, all about how their brands are performing across the USA or North America or the world and how great the brand is, and then suggest some new listings. And that is not appealing to a retailer because that's not about their business. They don't really care about your brand all that much. They care about their categories and how your brand plays a role within that category. So if you rephrase the purpose of what you're doing to talk about increasing sales, I've got an idea that's going to help you to increase sales and profit in your category. You know, I've done some analysis, and I've got some interesting information to show you that we're going to be able to satisfy an unmet shopper need through some new innovation that we have available. So positioning it that way, instead of just talking about your brands, is a really great way to rephrase that into a purpose that's going to be more beneficial for your retail audience. And so I've also provided some other examples in here. I'm not going to go through details of them, but you'll have access to a copy of this presentation after. But really rephrasing, and you know, like I said, this audience is only retailer, but you can do this for your internal audience as well. And you really need to be thinking about the importance of the purpose for your audience and not for you and your business, and talking about which really is a tendency. I've worked with a lot of clients in virtual training as well as in live training to rebuild presentations to turn it into something that's more meaningful and relevant than just brand. And that even goes into when you're showing category results, not just talking about brand, because honestly, it should be about the shopper and the segments that are most important to the shopper, and not just showing brand differences. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about some of the common faux pas with some of the data and it will show you ways to kind of turn the data into something more meaningful and relevant that's much more insightful than just the numbers. So I have a point here. As a retailer, tell me what market share your brand has and how it can increase my overall share against my competition. That's great, Angie. Totally agree with that. Because retailers are more concerned about their market shares. They don't care about category shares, honestly. If it's one of the least important metrics that they have, it's your brand share, and that you're not getting the same level of brand share as your competitors. That is so old and dusty and crusty, and you really need to be turning that around, tied in with the shopper and your shopper needs. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse there, but really make sure that you think about that purpose for your presentation. And then when you go to create your presentation, that should be how you decide the positioning of every single slide. When you're creating an engaging presentation, make sure you're creating relevant, compelling stories for your audience using a storyboard. Storyboards are a really great starting point. In our online training, we have examples of how to develop storyboards and in storytelling, but you don't want to be creating decks. You don't want to be going in, presenting a whole bunch of numbers that have absolutely no meaning or relevancy for whatever it is that the purpose of your presentation is. You also want to tie in your stories with your audience priorities, needs, conditions, limitations, and opportunities to ensure that it is something that resonates with them, that you're not going in and making recommendations on something that's totally against, even internally, totally against something like policy or processes or anything like that. Using animation and PowerPoint to control your story and making it easier to follow. I'm actually going to show you some examples of that, because if you just have a static presentation, even just this slide, right? There's no animation on it. So you have to kind of follow along with me as I read the boxes versus it being if I have them each show up one by one and talk a little bit about it. It just makes it easier for you to kind of follow along. Make fonts bigger. That's a really important one because some people are watching this on their phone, which is kind of scary. I don't think you should be participating on a phone, but sometimes we don't have a choice. But make the fonts bigger. And also, if you're doing the presenting, add in a script. So add in your narration notes. And I don't know if you know what I mean by that. I'm actually going to share my screen to show you what I do. So I am going to share my screen that has my notes on it. So if you put PowerPoint into the right presenter mode, then you can see in this box right here that it actually has the narration on it, and it gives you the points to remember to say. So you don't want to put everything on your slide because then you're covered with words and you don't want to be reading off your slides, but then it allows you to remember the key points within your slides. And that's just underneath in the narration area underneath your PowerPoint slide. So it's a really great way for you to kind of stay on track. Remember to say those little key nuggets. Remind you to do certain things at specific times within your presentation. Build in a chance to discuss or get feedback every few minutes. This is a really important one. I work with a lot of retail customers, and one of their biggest complaints in the online space when they're getting presentations done is that the presenter doesn't stop talking. They rely 100% on their presentation. And so they might be feeling really good that their presentation is amazing, but if you're not stopping and checking in with your audience every few minutes or getting them to do something or say, show of hands, how many of you think this is a great idea? Those kind of things, or type in the chat box, or, depending on how many people are there, don't be that you're just talking at them, or that asynchronous approach to it. You want to be getting them talking about things, and then give specific actions at the end of the presentation that tie in with the purpose. What are those next steps? What do we need to do from here? Getting buy-in, agreeing to a critical path, those kind of things, so that, or I'll write the critical path now and I'll send it to everyone. And if you have any changes to it, then we can kind of do that through email, like those kind of things. So you're not just leaving it this kind of loose-ended, or, I'm going to follow up with you at the end of next week or next Tuesday or whatever it is. If you own the presentation, the more you can try to take control of it, regardless of if it's internal or external, and if you stay on top of following up, you'll have much better success than if you just kind of leave it a little bit loosey-goosey and we'll wait and see kind of thing. Any questions so far? No? Okay, so I talked a little bit about animation. And so, I am a big fan of sharing, of putting data into presentations, but you have to be very strategic in what it is that the numbers you're presenting. And you also want to make sure that, especially in the online space, and even when you have it up on the big screen or whatever, if you're doing a live presentation, that you can talk to the numbers. So this is just a small table. Sometimes I see these massive tables in presentations. And the problem is that then, if you just start talking about it and saying, so, your segment 1, 2, and 3 are not very well developed because they have a low CDI, but they are, segment 2, 3 is up 2%. But then you've got plant-based, which is growing 17%. But then you got, so you have to follow me. And it's the worst thing in the world when I'm sitting listening to a presentation is when my eyes are bouncing all around. I cannot even see what the heck you're talking about because there's lots of things going on the screen. So you want to make sure you have first of all, your data cleaned up, but also rather than doing something like this, imagine being able to have your table come up talking about, here's the CDI on your segments 1, 2, and 3. These are the least developed segments because they're below 100. And then we've got your most developed segments. You're doing really well in plant-based protein. And in segment 5, you're very, very highly developed on it. Once again, these interpretations of indexes, I'm going to be talking about this in tomorrow's session because this is a whole other piece, because I would not say that the least developed are your biggest opportunities and the most developed are your least opportunities because you're already highly developed, that it would not be my recommendation 100%. You know, if I want to talk about plant-based protein in a little bit more detail, then I can animate it to show, okay, so now let's talk about plant-based protein. You are growing at 17%. To Angie's point, I should probably have a market share index in here to show the development. Actually, no, that's what the category development index is. So you're already highly developed in this, but I've done some research and we've dug into the numbers for you, and we think we can even grab a bigger part of the share in this category. And that's really what I want to talk to you about, is how to continue to further develop that, because this is where the shoppers are moving to plant-based proteins. The anticipation is that this is an area that's going to continue to grow. You want to be highly developed in that area. So I've got the information on how to animate this and how you can convert a table to an EMF file. It's a very, very simple thing to do. But then what it does, if I hit escape, actually, if I bring over my actual raw PowerPoint, just bear with me here for a sec. If where is my slide? So if I have this presentation, what happens is that when I convert it to an EMF file, every single part of the table is a separate piece. And so what it allows me to do is that I can then put animation on specific parts of the table to tell the story. Super cool way to do it. It's way more interesting than looking at a table and trying to figure out what you need to do from here. So like I mentioned before, we have some really great courses in our learning portal, and we can also run virtual training on these opportunities areas, because it's a really important one. Presentation skills have never been more critical than they are today. And from everything we can tell, we're not going to go back to the same scenario where we're, going to drive down the street or go up to somebody's office to meet, but there's going to continue to be a lot of virtual meetings and virtual presentations, and we need to get better at putting those presentations together. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about the meeting. You've got this great presentation ready to go now. You've gone through and you've learned how to do great data visualization, you storyboarded, you feel great about the presentation, and now it's time for, it's showtime. And so you want to make sure you do introductions, make sure that show interest in everyone. Don't just jump in and start doing things. Even if it's your team, make sure that you kind of have a little bit of a discussion or a funny thing, or make sure everyone knows each other, suggest guidelines for the meetings, set the purpose of the call and what you're trying to do. Don't just jump in and start presenting. The other thing that's a really great tip is to not share your presentation right away. Like when I started, I had just me on, and that's because I really want to make it personal. I want you to see me and know I'm excited and engaged in this. And another really important one is looking at your camera. So if you have more than one monitor, I actually have 3, and my camera is in a very specific spot. And so if I'm looking up at my presentation up here, I'm not talking to you. So make sure that you're looking at the camera and you know where the camera is, and that you have your information in the right monitor so that you can be looking at your camera. And spend less time talking and more time listening. So getting feedback, getting engagement, seeing if everybody thinks you have a good idea, or when you're showing numbers, is there anything else that is surprising to you when you see these numbers, like that kind of a thing. Really show passion for your audience's business. Let them know you understand things from their perspective, offer help, find solutions, give suggestions, and really add value. Show interest in their company or their team or their role, and increase understanding and passion for each other's work can really help to drive collaboration and added value in our presentations. And then the last piece is meeting follow-up. So Really important for you to build ongoing rapport with whoever your audience was. Make sure that you send out a follow-up email if you're the one that did the presentation with the next steps, who owns what, key dates, all those kind of things, suggestions. If you end up seeing an article or something that is relevant to what you were talking about and the people who are in that meeting might be really interested in it, send it to them. Send them a link and say, hey, thought this was cool. You can also do video calls. Some people prefer to do a one-on-one Zoom meeting to talk about things instead of always relying, especially on email. Email can be so dry. Phone calls, wow, what a concept. But on the other side, people need to answer their phones. I love it when people phone me because it doesn't happen a lot because we rely so much on the internet. So some of the biggest challenges in the virtual space I've got listed here, and then some of the suggestions for opportunities for in ways that you can help to increase the engagement and the buyer's attention and preparation and developing your relationships. And all of these things are really important and paramount to successful online virtual presentations. So if you were participating in today's session from Zoom, you're going to get a link to a really cool virtual sales success checklist that pretty much captures everything that I just walked you through in the presentation in a linked version that you can go in, and it's a checklist so you can make sure that you've got all of those pieces checked off for your next session. And I really hope that they're helpful for you so that you can have better and more productive meetings in the future. So in terms of next steps, you'll receive an email today with a link to the video from this course, as well as to the resource book. You can also learn about our new instructor-led virtual training, and or if you want to access a whole bunch of courses that are some really compelling virtual courses that we run every couple of months, you can purchase an annual subscription at CMKG, just throwing out some different ideas. If you did like this session, there's a link to a LinkedIn resource that would be great. Or if you went into LinkedIn and just hashtag CMKG for this course, it would be really greatly appreciated. We're really trying to spread the love. We love doing this training, whether it's the complimentary stuff or the things that are custom for our clients. And hopefully you can make it for tomorrow's session on commonly misinterpreted measures and mishaps in your analytics. So I'm going to stay on the line for a couple of minutes in case there's any questions from any of you. More than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you have a very happy Wednesday. Take care.